All right, everyone. Welcome to Take You in Action PA, episode 62. I'm Calvin. I'm your host, and we got a very special one for tonight. We've got a lot to talk about, so I will just get right into it with our guest here. So some of you may know him from his work in the Mises Institute. Some of you may know him from his episodes on the Tom Woods show, but he's here tonight to give us a very special announcement that I'm sure most of you know already, but for those of you that don't, we will definitely be getting into that. He's the author of 12 books, a distinguished fellow at Hillsdale College, former professor of liberal studies and global studies at NYU. And his scholarly and academic essays have appeared in many academic journals. He holds a Ph.D. in literacy and cultural studies from Carnegie Mellon, a master's in English from Case Western, and a BA in English literature from the University of Pittsburgh. Let's bring him up, Dr. Michael Rectenwald. How are you doing tonight?
I'm great. How are you? Thanks for having me, Calvin.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So I was really excited when I found out that you were in Pennsylvania, because hopefully we will be able to meet up at some point soon and talk about some of the ideas we're going to talk about tonight in a little bit more detail. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Excellent. Look forward to it as well.
Definitely. So why don't you start by introducing yourself a little bit, giving us some of your background, because I know to this audience you might be new. So tell us how you got started as a college professor and the transformation that you went under to get you to the point of being a libertarian.
Oh, that's a great question. So, yeah, I mean, I worked in advertising after undergrad for like 9 years, and I ended up at a radio and television network as a regional sales manager in advertising. And then I kind of burned out on that career and decided I wanted to go back to graduate school and become a professor. So, in the interim between the time I went to undergrad and graduate school, there had been a massive sea change in the university system, especially in the humanities departments and English in particular. And that was this introduction of what's called theory. And by that, they're referring to Marxist, post-Marxist, neo-Marxist, postmodernist, feminist, and other types of theory. So I had no idea that this was going to be the case. I saw that very early on, you have to be sort of involved in this kind of thinking, and you have to use these lenses to study these objects, these cultural objects that you're dealing with. And you're basically inundated with this kind of stuff for, I guess it was, for me, it was like 3, 4, 5, 6 years of it. So I ended up going to Case Western Reserve for my master's, and then Carnegie Mellon for the Ph.D. in literary and cultural studies. And I got a job in a university in North Carolina, then another one at Duke, and then finally at NYU, where I spent 11 years teaching cultural history, history of science, and academic writing. So, yeah, that was by the time I got deeply into graduate school, I had been effectively, I'd effectively been more or less drawn into through all this inundation into Marxist and some postmodernist thinking. And so I had, that was just an avocation. I never taught Marxism in my classes per se. That was kind of an avocation in which I was writing for Marxist publications, periodicals, and things like that. but I never indoctrinated or proselytized in the classroom whatsoever. The things changed in NYU for me. I started to have what I call deviationist thoughts, beginning in the spring of 2016, when I started to have kind of deviationist thoughts. That is to say, as in like the Soviet Union, when you were called basically a deviationist if you started straying from the orthodoxy. And so I was straying from the orthodoxy, and I knew I was. And I was having a lot of misgivings about the whole social justice movement and the woke crowd, as they're called now, and started speaking out about it, and mostly on Twitter at first. And then I was interviewed, and this history is pretty well worn. I've told it many times in Springtime for Snowflakes, and a little bit more in a book called Beyond Woke. And soon I had a gestalt shift altogether. So little did I know that I was undergoing a complete transformation. I thought I was just critiquing some insanity on the left, but I underwent a total transformation. First anti-leftist and civil libertarian, and soon after that, a full-blown economic, social, political libertarian, and then anti-Marxist. And I've written 5 books. In all of those books, I critique Marxism theoretically, empirically, etc. Everything about it. So that was very much aided by my reading in Mises, and that is, in case your listeners don't know, I'm sure they do, Ludwig von Mises, and the podcast is named after one of his greatest books. And then more and more texts, Rothbard and Hoppe, and I became fully entrenched in it, and I have become a very hardcore libertarian. And I've spoken, written, and been more or less like a kind of activist against Marxism and then statism itself in general. So, I got introduced to the Mises Institute when, after I went on Tom Woods' show the first time, they asked me to speak at one of their events. In fact, I was the Ludwig von Mises Memorial Lecturer, and I delivered a lecture on social justice versus libertarianism, and that was I thought, very fruitful engagement. So I was having a creative explosion after I converted, and I guess there was a lot of stuff that had been really building up for some time, and it was kind of like a dam breaking. You don't see it until the gusher comes through, but it means there had been a lot of pressure on it. And so that took place. And after that speech, I was asked to speak again and again, and I started writing for the Mises Institute, and then I started podcasting for them more recently. And I was speaking all over the country at for different organizations, liberty-minded organizations. I've spoken at hundreds of different organizations, and all from this libertarian perspective. And I've also written, the 5 books since the transformation, and hundreds of, I guess 100 articles or more for Mises Institute, and other places like Chronicles magazine as well, and several other places that I, not necessary to mention. So that's it in a nutshell. And then, look, I spoke for the Mises Caucus 3 times, and I was asked by Michael Heiss to whether I was interested in running for president. I didn't. I'd never thought of seeking political office. And in fact, I'm not a politician. I considered myself like an analyst and polemicist. But I decided take Michael's offer and really consider it. And then looking at the mission that the Mises Caucus from Michael Heiss, what it represented, I decided, given the mission that was being presented, this was exactly the kind of thing. And I had been a fan of the decentralized revolution, very much so. And I'd written about effective decentralization in my books, especially the last one, The Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty. So I decided to do it. And I'm in this to, well, we could talk about my campaign more later, but that's the short story of the transfer motion, and it takes me all the way from 1993 to 2023.
Yeah, that's a lot, and that's definitely a massive transformation over time. Like, I'm sure a lot of libertarians, most of them even, have come from somewhere else, but I can't say I can think of many communists that have come from that side of the aisle over to libertarians. So there's definitely something to be said for that.
I know there's a lot of people that were neocons. I've spoken to dozens of people saying, I was a neocon. I think it comes down to the same thing. It turns into the question of the state. Do you somehow come to hate the state? And I think that's really the main crux. And it doesn't matter if you come from a rightist statism or a leftist statism, it's still statism. And I think Marxism is a leftist statism, and that's the ultimate statism on the left.
Yeah, I agree. And the Libertarian Party has a really, it's like more of a crowded field than normal this year, but it has a big opportunity in the anti-war space in particular to make a big impact. And we can get into that, but there's something that you've talked about in a few of your talks up to this point, which is I don't know what the right word would be, the catchphrase or the slogan for the campaign: "Wreck the regime."
Wreck the regime.
So,
that's the campaign slogan.
Yeah, right. So why don't you break that down for us? Like, what exactly does it mean?
Well, it's a very action-oriented campaign slogan, and it requires human action. Speaking of human action, this is a campaign that's not a campaign only; it's a movement. And I've been asked to lead it now, and that's what my campaign will undertake. And that is to say, there's kind of two prongs to the campaign. One, of course, is to educate people, to bring people out from outside of the party that are lowercase libertarians that have not found a home or do have a political home, but can really are becoming disaffected with it, or have seen the limitations of it and the lack of principles in that big L scenario, that are finally ready to make a change. And I've already seen many people, friends of mine, follow me in this particular path. Not that I was in that path, but they followed into the Libertarian Party and have joined the party. And so what I'm going to do is the first prong is the educational prong, the messaging and the application of the libertarian principles to the various issues that are very much impending on us, that are extremely timely and very necessary to address. And that you mentioned war is one, and there's several others, of course. I could get into all that, but the other part of the campaign is the decentralization campaign, and that is, this is not Michael Rectenwald wrecking the regime single-handedly. I'm not running a top-down campaign or a campaign to further a kind of top-down political outlook. Frankly, up until yesterday, I was the only campaign really talking about localism and decentralization as the primary axis on which this campaign is based. And So that means we're talking about wresting control of power from the central government and vesting it in the people at the local level. And that means running for office, running for school board, running for taking over the guns and schools in your district, getting libertarians to run at the local level where they succeed at a far greater rate. In fact, they don't succeed at any rate outside of the local level to this point. There's maybe one or two state representatives in the whole in the whole country. So we think that winning is about getting control at the local level and nullification of unconstitutional laws and mandates. And just think if we'd had control over the local districts, town city halls, township halls, etc. During COVID, we could have resisted the mandates that destroyed the economy. We could have kept businesses open. We could have resisted the whole COVID regime altogether. This is what we need to have in place in case the next emergency is foisted on us by the regime. And that's important because they have to drive their agenda into the local level outside of the, international policy. They really have to drive the agenda to the local level into the fabric of society in order to make it work. So if it's resisted at that level, then it's nullified. And speaking of nullification, that's exactly how you do it, through nullification. So it's also could be understood in terms of the doctrine of the lesser magistrates. That is to say, this country was not founded on the basis of top-down federal government control over the population. It was founded for local control. And this is really returning the country, hopefully, to the kind of constitutional republic that it was meant to be in the first place. And that is not under a all-powerful federal government. That's not what this country was meant to be. And the way we do that is in the methods that I said. Now, that's not to say that we're not running a national campaign for president. And that's to say I will be a spokesperson for the party, representing the Libertarian Party broadly. I have the widest media reach of any candidate in the race. I've been on, all kinds of major shows. I don't want to get into it too much in terms of which ones, but, just look on my website and you'll see I've been on everything. And, but furthermore, I'm going to have like a course released by Hillsdale College, and that'll come out in like January. That'll reach some 6 million people. So I'm going to be able to make the reach and get the attention and get the ability to draw people into the Libertarian Party. We've got to have new people, obviously. If we don't get new people, we'll never get anywhere. So we need to convert people to libertarianism, and that's where my role as an educator and a media spokesperson comes in.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I think even not just within the Libertarian Party, but also even outside of the party with like other third-party candidates, there's been a consistent issue of unrealistic expectations, like, oh, we can win this year, we can get 10 or 15% this year. Like that's not going to happen. So you need to take the energy that you get and channel it into areas that are going to last. So
Exactly.
that's definitely true.
I said this last night in a Q&A on X Space, is that, they asked what would your campaign, what would you like your campaign to be remembered for? And I don't want it just to be remembered. I want it to leave a lasting legacy on the ground, and that is in place for the future, from which we can build up from local level to higher level offices. We don't even have a single person in the Congress or Senate of the United States, and yet people are promising that they're going to give it a real go to win the presidency. I mean, no offense, but that's not politically realistic. And it's just, I can't be inauthentic and promise such things. I will not lie, and I will tell the truth about everything. And I think that's just like, yeah, I really want to win too, but so I also would like to win the lottery. But this, I think, has less chances than winning the lottery.
You're not wrong. Yeah, it's a long shot. So you got to take advantage of the platform, like I was saying, because whether we like it or not, this is when people are paying attention. It's that 4-year cycle. That's when people have their eyes focused on politics. Outside of that, your average person is not going to be paying attention.
Yeah, absolutely. This is when people pay attention, and it's the chance to actually introduce people to the principles and as they apply to the issues that are pressing on them today. Not just abstract principles, but showing them how the principles apply. That's really where it's at. And I think, Joe Jorgensen was good at principles a bit, but did not see the pressing applications that were necessary to make. And I will be able to do that.
Right. So to break down a little bit more your plan to do that. So I did see some clips recently. You're on Glenn Beck's show.
Yeah, that was a while ago. I mean, I've been on Glenn Beck.
Okay.
I've been on him about 10 or 15 times. But I expect that if I get the nomination, I'll be back on such shows. Glenn Beck, Tucker Carlson many times, and on and on and on. I mean, I've been on every show on Fox News. Now, they're going to make it difficult to get on there, but now that Tucker's peeled away against his will, I guess it's very possible, very, very possible that I'll get back on with him, especially as the nominee. I mean, they're not going to pick a person to talk to right now unless it's extremely, we make the news somehow. I think it's gonna take the nomination to get me back on these things, to be honest.
Right. So that's good. So that's one element of it that's definitely important. I'd say the other element of outreach that's important, and this you should be able to capitalize on at this stage, is on the ground action in terms of speaking events like Coalition, speaking events in particular, and yes, doing campaign events with down ballot candidates. So can you talk to us about your plans for those? Do you have anything coming up? Tell us what you got going on.
Well, I think I've been invited to speak at what would be the sequel to the Rage Against the War, or whatever it was called. I forget the exact name.
Rage Against the War Machine. Yeah.
Against the War Machine, at the sequel to that. And then, we're connecting with local candidates who are asking for endorsements and things like that. And we plan on helping them in the elections that they're running on the ground. And we're teaming up with them. Michael's putting together those partnerships. And I will show up at those events, as many as I can get to physically within the time span that's given in my own, and its limitations of actual space and time. I'll do it.
Okay, awesome. So we'll definitely keep an eye out on some of those coalition events. Hopefully you can get out to as many of those as possible. And definitely some Pennsylvania events as well. Are probably already have this on your calendar, but the Pennsylvania convention is the first weekend of March.
Yeah, I'll definitely be there, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll be a big one.
Oh yeah, and it's in my backyard here. I'm in Pittsburgh. I am a Pennsylvanian. I'm a Pittsburgher, first and foremost. So that has meaning in our state, as you know.
Oh yeah, for sure. Even over in the Philadelphia area, I know there's an attachment to the specific areas. People think that they're right next to each other, but for those who don't know, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh are still like 6 hours away. So I think that distance alone is bigger than most states.
And they're separated by what I think it was James Carver called Pennsyltucky.
Exactly. Yeah.
Rather disparagingly, but nevertheless, they're separated by a lot of different communities and in between, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Right. So let's go to your top issues. So this is what you'll talk about on the campaign trail and on the shows that you go on, they'll say, what are your top 3 or 4 issues? So you have a little more time than you will on those shows. So you can tell us what they are, then you can break it down a little bit. So what are your top issues?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that we have top issues and then we have issues that are most pressing. And I think right now, the most pressing issue has to become top of mind. And that is all this war involvement of the U.S., the funding and arming of Ukraine and Israel and possibly Taiwan as well. So that would put us in 3 theaters should something break out in China between China and Taiwan. And we're already involved now with Israel. We are sending troops, which they say will be non-combatant troops. But if these people get shot at, they're suddenly implicated in the war, and we're going to be at war over there. And then, of course, the Ukraine situation, the funding and arming of Ukraine, probably lending a military intelligence. We're at a crisis point here of World War III breaking out. So we have to have a principled stance, and we need to get the word out of why the United States should not be arming and funding other countries. And Ron Paul was great on this. We shouldn't be taking sides in these gang wars. We should be neutral with reference to them. But the main thing is what we do. We do have culpability and moral responsibility if we, in fact, fund people to kill each other and escalate, as they're doing in escalate and extend, prolong these wars like in Ukraine. This thing would have come to a close long time ago if it weren't for the U.S. And its allies in NATO funding and arming Ukrainian army or their mercenaries, whatever's going on over there. It's hard to say. But this is a travesty. Without adjudicating the history of that region or adjudicating the history of the Israel-Palestine region and area, and conflict, we don't need to be full-fledged historians on these things to know what the right thing to do is. And that has to do with not funding and arming these people, these countries. We should not be arming Israel. We should not be funding Israel. We should not be sending troops to Israel. The United States should not be escalating these wars, creating enemies, making some kind of friendships, but I think they're very, shall we say, convenience, friendships of convenience, and not really of reciprocation. In the case of Israel in particular. This is the most pressing thing because, as I've put it before, we can't end the Fed if we're all dead. And this is a real prospect here of World War III. There's so many possible players that could jump in. And the United States, Biden has said, I mean, they're already saying from his State Department to his military, if in fact Hezbollah fires on, really engages Israel to a much greater extent than they have been already, we're going to fight them. So here we are. And it could implicate Iran, and that would be a war with Iran. And that could draw in Russia to another theater. And that could even draw China in. So that's enough right there to really worry us. And then, of course, the Fed is the funder of all this. And we need to get, we need to end the Fed and, audit and end the Fed. But in the interim of that, we need to establish and use parallel currencies that erode at the Fed's overarching monopoly on currency and put into play alternate parallel currencies on the ground in the present. And this is already happening. And so that needs to be encouraged. Indeed, we need to encourage the use of parallel currencies. And then, of course, that entails, we want the striking the abolition of the legal tender laws altogether, so that we actually have competition in the marketplace, a competition amongst really private banks and currencies, private currencies. There's no reason why we have to have a central currency. And that's where I differ from Mike Dermott, for example, just because he's really arguing for the dollar as the only currency overall. And I'm saying that's not necessary. It's not necessary that we just do a gold new deal and just back the dollar with gold again. We don't need to even worry. We should abandon the dollar. So that's another major issue. And of course, this is all tied into the war, all these wars. If it weren't for this unfettered printing of money, there would be no funding of all this. And this is bankrupting the country. And this is really why people are struggling. They're struggling because they're being robbed by the Fed, by the federal government, and this has to stop. This is what we really want to get in front of people. How are they being robbed? Tell them the truth about how they're getting robbed. And people, I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't know what the Federal Reserve even is, and whether what their function is, and why they're a counterfeiting agency. All that has to come out. And, I think that ties into the economics, of course. Really want to abolish the warfare welfare state. But, in terms of welfare and social welfare programs and even Social Security, that can't be done overnight. You don't pull the plug on people and let them die in the street. There has to be an off-ramp, and we have to give that off-ramp. We have to give credence to that off-ramp and show why the free market, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, some people say the free market triggers people. So let's call it free exchange of, goods between each other. Let's just call it unfettered, unregulated trade and production. We need to show how that is really the basis of real social welfare. That's really how social welfare is improved, and that state programs to address so-called social welfare issues like poverty, homelessness, health issues. These all create what they say that they're trying to mitigate. They create more of it.
Right. So end the wars, end the Fed, and free market economics.
Yeah.
Those are all very important points. So yeah, I have to admit, I know that a lot of people were following in the footsteps of Ron Paul. So Fed was one of their most important issues. That was one of the last things I came around on personally. But as soon as I dug more into it and realized the destructive effect that they have on the currency and how it wasn't always this way, it was just, I could never look at it the same way again. It's one of those big turning points.
Yeah, that's a big turning point when you get that. But I think they have an effect more on, not only just on the economy, they actually affect the culture as well, because their practices of inflation, of deflating the value of the dollar, such that it's not really even possible to save money. You don't make anything on savings. This increases the time preference of people, and which then increases their profligate and otherwise unprovidential lifestyles, which leads to cultural decline and decadence. And that's what we see going on.
Yeah, exactly. And it all funnels back into the war state. And I hinted at this at the beginning, but so now that we're on it, I'll emphasize this is what sets the Libertarian Party apart this year. Like, I'll talk more about Israel-Palestine at the end because we have a little bit of breaking news on that. But with RFK Jr. now essentially taking the same stance as Joe Biden when it comes to Israel-Palestine in terms of intervention, Cornel West hasn't been consistent. He hasn't been a whole lot better on the foreign policy issue. I can't imagine the Green Party or the Constitution Party would even be much better. Democrats and Republicans definitely aren't as good on this issue. So that really creates an opening for us as the anti-war party. And as you said, this issue is critical enough already, so it's not something that can be overlooked this year.
No, it's got to be the what distinguishes us, and and we have the principles on which to stand. And none of the parties, there was this brief glimmer of a anti-war right, I think, largely inaugurated really by Trump with his opposition to post facto. I don't know whether he objected to it at the time, but the war in Iraq, and then his followers went along and said, yeah, the war in Iraq was horrible. But I think only because he had led them to that conclusion. And then, of course, they opposed the war in Ukraine and funding and arming Ukraine. And so it looked like, oh, wow, there might be a real contingent of anti-war rightists, But this was ephemeral and unprincipled, and likewise, it's disappeared. And they've folded this whole so-called anti-war right back into the neocon nest. And that's where they are now. And now they're screaming for bulldozing up Gaza and destroying the people, just flatten the place, kill them all, drive them into the sea, all kinds of inflamed rhetoric, which helps support the state's very ambitions. And they play right into the hands of the state and the state of Israel. So it's really terrible. So we need to get across the principles behind our pacifism, or if you don't want to call it pacifism, the importance of peace. And I think that's difficult because there's a part of the brain, I believe, and a lot of this I think could be broken down into brain, having a management function of your own brain. Is that war rhetoric really taps into like the amygdala of the brain where people's aggressions lie, and it's a prefrontal cortex area of the brain, and people, the idea of crushing and killing people taps into that, and then they just go along with it in fervor, and it overwrites their cognitive faculties altogether. So what does war do? Well, it destroys the basis of society. It's not just the aggression kills people. It actually destroys the basis of society and cooperation and wealth. It destroys wealth. It destroys the free cooperative exchange of goods between people. It destroys human flourishing, and it kills people in the process. So we need to get this across to people. Why does war do that? Well, it interrupts all the activities that we would have between each other that are then put on the back burner or disappeared in favor of this aggressive posture. And, it's really sad to see, and it's shocking in a way to me, to see so many people that I thought were somewhat allied to turn into mouthpieces of state propaganda after they had resisted so much other state propaganda like COVID propaganda, Ukraine propaganda, and post facto the propaganda that was propagated during the Iraqi war. It's stunning, but it makes sense because they haven't been principled.
Right. And before we leave the topic of the wars more generally, there is one other point I wanted to bring up. So looking back at the history of World War II, people might think it started on September 1st, 1939. That's what people say is the official start of the war, but that's not really when the war started. You could go at the very least as far back as June of 1937, because that's when Japan began their all-out war against China, was trying to invade and conquer as much of their territory as possible. They did not stop fighting until after the atomic bombs went off. 8 years later. So that, the world wars don't start overnight. They don't start with, they don't always start, at least, with 10 nations going to war against each other all at once. It can start small, it can start isolated, and then grow. So if we already have Ukraine and Russia, and that's already been going on for 2 years, and now we could have another possibly long conflict going on between Israel and Gaza, and maybe Israel's neighbors could be allying with Gaza, and China possibly going after Taiwan. Where could this go?
A total explosion. I mean, we're looking at the, all kind. We're looking. I could see what they're lining up a new Axis and Allies scenario actually, and the what they would deem the Axis powers would be Russia, China, Iran, possibly Qatar. At least as a funding source, and who knows who else. And there would be some questionable players that would go either Axis or ally, like Turkey, but the United States would be in the so-called allies, and of course Israel and most of NATO, all of NATO, most of Europe, I should say. So it could be a massive conflagration that has to be warded off, and people have to understand that it doesn't do any good to destroy. That's what this is about. It's easier to destroy things than it is to build them up and create. And this is an impulse in the human psyche that has to be overcome. I don't think it's just something that is a policy matter. It's not just a policy matter. It is a kind of human evolution question. I'm serious about that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And now it doesn't get any better because Biden makes a risky trip over to Israel to, show an no holds barred, declaring our support, giving them billions of dollars, maybe like we gave tens of billions. Okay. Tens of billions. Yeah. Like we've been giving to Ukraine. And I don't think they're stopping that either. I think they're still trying to give money to Ukraine. And now we have just this evening, pro-Palestine protesters swarmed the Capitol inside and out. And Rashida Tlaib gave a speech in favor of Palestine, and now I don't know if they've gone by now, but they were protesting inside the Capitol itself. So what on earth is happening? Where are we going with this?
Well, I can't go along with the left and their dancing in the streets in support, in celebration of what Hamas did. That's where they go somehow. And that, I think, is not principled either. That's just crazy. So, but when they say, end the war, cease fire, I can't disagree with them. I mean, they're right. A broken clock is right at least twice a day, and maybe in their case once. I don't know. Maybe it skips the one. But anyway, the left is usually wrong about everything. But in this case, they happen to be right. Now, there is the differential treatment of, for example, the protesters that occupied the Capitol building and the protesters on January 6th are sitting in prison. Some of them weren't even there. We're going to prison 15, 17 years. So this disconnect is also very, very disturbing and complex, and it's really hard to figure out. I mean, I think what they do is, look, they know that the left goes along with them on just about everything that they do. Most state policy, most of their, most of the regime's positions are supported by the left now. They managed to interpolate the left and to get them behind the establishment in almost everything they do. This just happens to be a trigger point that they don't have full support of. And this is not all the left. This is only a contingent. That's another thing. A lot of the left is well, they're neocons. A lot of the left are neocons. So, I mean, you look at what they're selling on TV from so-called leftist outlets like MSNBC and so forth. There's no difference. There's no light between them, really, and Fox News on this issue. So, it's bizarre. There is a differential treatment of these people as compared to like the January 6th protesters. I don't think either of them should be in prison for trespassing. I don't believe that the state should be imposing these kind of penalties and punishments on people, no matter what their political affiliation is. I'm going to stand for the truth, no matter who happens to be telling it at any given time.
Yeah, definitely. And it's crazy to see the reversal, because on one hand, if there was some element of the government thinking this is our chance to get the right side of politics to support the war machine, in that sense, they got it right. Because a lot of them are going all out now. But at the same time, and I didn't even expect this necessarily until tonight, now the left might be turning against it again. So it'll be very interesting. Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see if this continues, if this materializes, and even if they would be satisfied with just cutting off support for the war machine, or if they would go so far as to say we should be doing the opposite and giving tens of billions of dollars to Gaza and supporting them.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, there's an aid package that I think it's being proposed. It's $100 billion, $10 billion to Israel, $90 billion to Ukraine, and then on top of that, there's the arms, the rockets, and the small diameter bombs, and the backup they're sending in fleets of ships and planes that are going to be sitting outside, on the coast and ready to go. And then there's the $1 billion to Gaza, the $1 billion of humanitarian aid. Here's the bombs to shoot them with. Oh, here's some aid after they shoot you. I mean, this is crazy. And people it doesn't register. I don't understand it. So I would love to see the right and left come together on something. And this would be a good point. But this looks like now the right is too far gone. They're crazy. I mean, they're rabid over this.
Yeah, it's pretty blatant. It's just, sometimes when it comes to like the different intelligence agencies funding both sides of the same conflict and not realizing that's happened so many times, but now it's out in the open and people don't even seem to notice or care.
They don't seem to notice. I think part of the left's protests probably are propped up, even not all of them, but some of them, I think. And that doesn't mean all the people aren't sincere. I don't think that means the people themselves aren't sincere. And I will commend people when they're right. And I think those protesters that went into the Capitol, they're right in what they're saying. This has got to stop. Some of the tactics they take, I don't know about, and certainly dancing in the streets, celebrating Hamas attacks and saying it was exhilarating, as I heard one speaker say in New York, it was exhilarating. It should not be exhilarating. It should be really, we should not hold in esteem and the gangsters on either side. And we certainly shouldn't be festering and fostering and producing and increasing, incensing and prolonging and escalating these conflicts by giving money and arms and military aid and arms and everything else, and almost the aid that's being cordoned off for Palestine is almost part of the conflict. It's almost like saying this is okay. We're going to give you some goods while you're being bombed because we're giving those people bombs at the same time. So in a way, that's kind of aiding the conflict as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with I believe I saw it was 200 U.S. troops off the coast of Israel just waiting to be deployed at a moment's notice. Like, are they just trying to give, or 2,000? Yeah, are they trying to give any possible excuse for a casus belli just to get us in the war, flying Joe Biden in, stationing the 2,000 troops off the coast. Like, if there was ever going to be a Gulf of Tonkin,
yeah, there it is.
This would be it.
And once they set foot on land, and one of them gets struck by something, they'll say it's from Hamas, and then we're in it. Then we'll be in it on the ground, and from the air, and from the sea. So we're talking about the U.S. involvement directly in the war now. Of course, there's involvement as it is, but I'm talking about putting people involved, not just the arms, and that would be just outrageous. I mean, that the people and it's a this travesty that the American public would fall for this again. It's just unbelievable. Don't they have any historical memory at all?
Yeah, and for a while, I thought Biden was going to get away with it, but now it seems like the establishment left is coming out against it. So I don't know how much of a base he's going to have left after this. He's losing the people that are on that side of the left.
He's going to have the support of the right. Isn't that ironic beyond belief? But they're conditional support. They're saying he's not doing enough. He released the $6 billion in Iran that they think funded Hamas, but that's it. That $6 billion was not. He didn't give them $6 billion. It was their money that had been frozen, and they keep losing that point. But the point is, he's going to have. There's going to be some strange bedfellows here.
Yeah, so it's definitely nerve-wracking for us not wanting to get involved, not wanting to be dragged into this conflict. And there's the additional factor of Biden himself, because it's to the point where not just the fact that he's so old and any blunder that he does with a slip of the tongue or wrong decision could result in us getting involved in this war, but there's also an element of if anybody that's in his administration wanted to take reckless action, like militaristic action that the American people would never support, then they could just throw Biden under the bus and run somebody else, and it'll be like, oh, that wasn't us, that was Biden.
Exactly, that's true. He's been nothing but a front skin suit, really, of the regime that's running him. I don't think he's just look, this is he's just being controlled. He's a ventriloquist dummy, really, is what he is. So he's just they're just going like, say this, say that, read this, read that. I don't think he has much cognizance of what's going on. I mean, he certainly has an idea of what's going on, but I mean, he has no will to push back or really take any executive actions on his own. This is all being dictated. And now the administration is telling the military officers to not use, the military officers, the Pentagon is telling the State Department people, do not use the phrase de-escalation under any circumstances. So, yeah, they're in it.
So they're not even trying.
No. They don't want to even think about de-escalating, and they're giving the green light to Israel 100%.
Oh, man. Okay. Yeah, I want to leave it on a high note, but I'm not quite sure where to take it from here. Why don't you give...
alive
no, go ahead.
We're still alive, and before World War III makes this impossible, which, may not happen, but it's possible, there's still a chance to change course here. And if libertarians and anybody else who wants to form a coalition around this issue really stands up and has a force, has an impact, we could turn this back. This is possible. That's possible. Whereas, Michael Rectenwald becoming president is like I said, winning. It's like the odds are less than winning a lottery, but this is possible because this involves people on the ground, and that's where it's happening. We're not going to do this from the top down. We have to do it from the ground up in all these circumstances.
Awesome. So, why don't you tell us about any upcoming events or any upcoming interviews you might be doing, and let people know where they can follow you?
Okay, sure. I'll be in Jacksonville, Florida this weekend to debate the other libertarian candidates that are there on Saturday. And then there's many items that you can find on the events calendar at rectheregime.com. That's my website, our campaign website, rectheregime.com. And I'll be on Tim Pool on Halloween, actually. So I'm thinking of dressing like Klaus Schwab for that. And I'll be, I've got, tell you the truth, I don't look too far ahead because it's daunting. So I just do what's on the schedule for the next day. I look at it the night before and then I go do it. And that keeps me able to do it without feeling completely overwhelmed, because this is a huge undertaking. So, and that's how I take it, one day at a time. But you can find where I'm going to be by going to our rectheregime.com and looking at the events page. You'll also see all the media that I've been doing. We keep track of everything, all the writing that I do, any essays that I'm putting out. I had an essay called "The Two Nations" about localism versus globalism. That really lays out the philosophy that's behind this campaign. There's other essays up there, and a lot of things that everything we do, we keep track of, and we put it all up there. And we're looking for people to get involved by running at the local level, but to get involved by joining the LP. Many people are disaffected by the establishment political class. This is the time to consider just getting away from them. Get away from them. Join a liberty movement. Join the liberty movement. Just cut ties with this sinking ship, because they're going to drag us all down. And there is hope. There's hope springs eternal. As long as we're alive and kicking, we can do this. We can stop and increase liberty. That's our goal. Increase liberty and peace and wealth, prosperity. We can do all this. It's not too late. As long as we're here, there's still time.
Right. So the campaign website, that's theregime.com.
That's right. One word.
Okay.
Rec the regime. No W, no. It's just no W, no K. It's just rec. It's taking the first three letters of my last name and putting it before the regime.
Right. So I had Rectenwald2024.com in the show notes, and I double checked to make sure, and both do work. So
rectheregime.com. Yeah.
Yeah. So Rec the Regime redirects to Rectenwald2024.com. So either one of those will work.
Right.
The email list on there as well to follow what the campaign is doing. And you said, tell us your socials as well. Where are you most active?
Well, I've been most active on X, and I'm not going to say formerly known as Twitter. I've been most active on X, and it's the same handle, Rec the Regime. Follow me there. Chime in, ask questions that if you're asking in good faith and not just a troll, I will answer you. But if it's obviously a bait and troll bait, I'm not going to go for it. So. But there you go. I'm an honest player I'm an honest player out here, and I'll tell you what's up in terms of myself and what I think's going on in the world and what I think the Libertarian Party should do and how we might do it.
Awesome. So yeah, I didn't know about the Twitter space last night, so I'll have to check that out. It sounds like a good debate. All right. So thank you very much, Michael Rectenwald, for joining us. If you just stay a moment, I'll wrap up the show.
Absolutely.
All right. My thanks for Dr. Michael Rectenwald for coming on the show tonight. Next week, we'll have Hannah Goodman, chair of LP Colorado, to talk about the strategy that they are working on. So that'll be a good conversation. That'll be Thursday of next week, 7:30 Eastern. So until then, don't forget to take human action. Bye.